After 3 full years with Miriam, I had finally made up my mind to end it all. The car accident had caused irreversible damage to her corneas. The doctors said she would almost certainly lose her sight entirely. I had turned it over in my mind endlessly, and I still believed that now was the best moment to break things off with her. This way I could give her something for the 3 years she had given me. And second, it would ensure she wouldn't try to track me down later. I pulled out every cent I had saved over the years, $75,000. I told her, "You're going to be blind, so do me a favor and stop hanging on to me like a lost puppy." 7 years later, she was now a red-hot A-list actress, adored by millions, the center of everyone's attention. During an interview, a reporter asked her if she had ever had a love in her life that left a lasting mark on her heart. But she shook her head firmly. "No, but I do have a hatred so deep it feels etched into my bones. That hatred makes me want to kill him with my own hands." Thick, silent snowflakes fell one after another. I stubbed out my cigarette. Then I tossed the butt and the empty pack into the trash bin. I brushed the accumulating snow off my shoulders and walked into the hospital. Today I had come to end things with my girlfriend Miriam for good. I had all my savings with me, $75,000. Consider it severance pay for the 3 years she had given me. It should be enough. After all, I had been the one taking care of her all this time. She hadn't really given much in return. I hope we could still part amicably. The 12th floor of the hospital wing. Miriam's room sat directly across from the nurse's station. A young nurse at the desk spotted me and grinned. "Back to see your girlfriend again, Edward. Back to see your girlfriend again, Edward. No flowers today?" I tried to force a smile, but nothing came, so I just nodded politely. I stopped outside her door for a few seconds, letting the cold from outside fade from my clothes. After a few more minutes, I pushed the door open and stepped in quietly. Miriam was standing by the window, gazing out. At the sound, she spun around, her voice bright with delight. "Edward, you came." There were several deep scrapes across her face. The wounds were just beginning to scab over with hard, pinkish-brown crusts. A big patch of her hair had been shaved off. Now it was wrapped in thick gauze. Her bare forearms were mottled with large, dark bruises. Under the loose hospital gown, there were even more injuries hidden. These were all from the car accident a week earlier. The hit and run. The driver had struck her at high speed and then dragged her for over 30 feet. It tore a chunk of her scalp clean off. Her left shoulder blade was shattered. Bruises covered her everywhere, along with extensive abrasions and torn skin. But the worst damage was to her eyes. The impact had caused irreversible damage to her corneas. The doctors said she would almost certainly lose her sight. He told me they would try conservative treatment first. If there was no improvement, a corneal transplant would be her only chance to see again. Looking at this girl who smiled so sweetly at me, her once bright eyes now clouded and dull, I could tell she could barely make me out anymore. To her, I was probably just a fuzzy shadow. I suddenly couldn't find my voice. How could I possibly leave her now? She had just survived a car crash, her body battered and broken, and she was about to lose her sight forever. But avoiding it wouldn't fix anything. This day had to come eventually. I stayed silent, but Miriam started to shuffle toward me, inch by inch. She could barely see anything now, so she reached out, feeling for anything to steady herself. She moved so slowly. I had no choice but to step forward and take her arm. The moment I gripped her arm, I felt her entire body relax against me. She leaned into me, utterly dependent. She was about to wrap her arms around me as usual, but then she wrinkled her nose and sniffed at my coat. "Edward, why do you smell like smoke? You've been smoking again, haven't you?" I was about to just admit it. Yes, I had. But what came out was, of course not. It's probably the smoke from other people in the lobby downstairs. Anyway, we were about to be done. There was no point in starting an argument now. I shot a glance at her in that flimsy hospital gown. I forced my face into a scowl and sharpened my voice. "Why aren't you in bed? You're about to go blind and you're still wandering around, always making trouble for everyone. Thank God this was almost over." She muttered under her breath. "I've been in bed so long, I'm practically growing mold. The nurse said it's snowing out there, and my eyes get blurrier every day. I want to see the world while I still can, even if it's just barely. Once I can't even see shadows, there won't be anything left." My chest suddenly tightened, like a dull knife twisting inside me, slowly. It was so stifling I could barely breathe. I couldn't help but mutter a curse. "You're such a fool." But she held me tight, just like she used to. A gesture we had repeated 1,000 times. She nuzzled her head against my cheek. Only this time, what I smelled wasn't her usual light, clean scent, but the thick, acrid odor of medicinal ointment. The smell turned my stomach. Bile rose in my throat. I instinctively shoved her away hard. Miriam stood frozen. She stared blankly at me as I covered my mouth and gagged. Her face was a mask of shocked bewilderment. Panic flooded her once bright, now empty eyes. "Edward, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice shaking. It took me a long moment to get over the nausea. I tilted my head back, took a deep breath, then slowly exhaled, forcing myself to calm down. I kept reminding myself why I was here today. My nails dug into my palms. I forced the rising rising emotions back down. I forced myself to speak in the most detached, icy tone I could muster. Miriam, the doctor said you're going blind. You know that, don't you? Her face fell. She dropped her gaze and nodded silently. The driver who hit you still hasn't been caught, so no one's covering your medical bills, right? Her lips started to tremble. Her whole face crumpled. She dropped her head and started picking at her knuckles again. It was an old nervous habit from when she was under extreme stress. I pulled a debit card out of my pocket and pressed it into her hand. This is all my savings. $75,000. Use it for your treatment. The pin is your birthday. No, I can't take this. Miriam shook her head frantically. She quickly hid her hands behind her back, refusing to take the card no matter what. Just listen to me first. I raised my voice. I grabbed her hand and shoved the card back in her palm. I tried to make my voice as cold and sharp as a blade. Take this money and keep it safe. From today on, we're over. We go our separate ways from here. Her struggle ceased instantly. She stood frozen. The pale light of snow filtered through the window. The hazy light fell across her small, frail frame. She looked as fragile as a porcelain doll about to shatter. Her face, backlit, was deathly pale. Her expression seemed hollowed out. After a long silence, she managed a dry, brittle smile. But tears were already streaming down her face. Edward, I don't understand what you're saying. I cut her off coldly. You're not a child. What's so hard to get? It means we're done. From this moment on, there is nothing between us anymore. But why? She was on the verge of falling apart, but she still bit her lip hard, desperately trying to hold herself together. But the tears wouldn't stop. They traced the still healing gashes on her cheeks. I couldn't bear to look at her anymore, so I turned away. Grief clawed at my gut like a fishhook. The pain made me double over. I pressed my hand hard against my stomach. I forced the words out in a hoarse, ragged whisper. Because I don't want a crippled girlfriend. Miriam seemed not to hear that. She stumbled and groped her way back toward me. She clutched my arm, her face etched with concern. Edward, what's wrong? Is your stomach hurting again? She leaned in closer, tried to read my face. Her face held nothing but concern for me, not a trace of anything else. That image made my heart lurch violently. Was I wrong? Should I not be doing this? The second that thought surfaced, I shoved it back down with all my strength. I had to make a clean break. Dragging it out would only make it worse. I snatched my hand away from hers. I deliberately twisted my face into a look of pure disgust. I've been clear enough. What part don't you get? The doctors said you're going blind. Do you really think I'd marry a woman who can't see? The cruelty on my face clearly scared her. She froze for a moment. Then she let out a cry like she'd been stabbed. Edward, what's happened to you? Are you abandoning me? I frowned and gave a firm nod. That's right. But this $75,000 is your severance for these 3 years. Take this money and get your eyes fixed. Maybe you'll still have a chance. She sobbed so hard she could barely breathe. She shook her head frantically and lunged into my arms. Her arms locked around my waist. I don't want to break up, and I don't want your money. I don't believe you can be this cruel. Back when we had nothing, you never abandoned me. I could feel her entire body shaking. Something pierced my heart. We had been together for so many years. I had watched her grow from a little girl into the beautiful woman she had become. I never wanted things to get this ugly. I took hold of her thin arms. I gritted my teeth and peeled her off me, inch by inch. I pushed her away, panting. I had only meant to create some space. But she lost her balance and fell to the floor. Fine, this was better. It made me seem even more cold-hearted. I looked down at her crumpled on the floor. I said coldly, get out. Stop trailing me like a stray dog. 7 years ago, when I took you in, you were a stray. You followed me everywhere. I brought you home. I paid your school fees. And now you're going blind. And you expect me to let you drag me down for the rest of my life? I've been a fool long enough. Now I'm telling you to leave. Do you hear me? This isn't a negotiation. It's a notice. Miriam went limp on the floor. Her hollow eyes were wide with shock. Her whole body shook uncontrollably. A few seconds later, it was as if a hole had been carved out of her chest. The pain tore a raw, wrenching sob from her throat, like the final cry of a wounded animal. Each sob from her felt like a knife twisting into me, until I was numb, leaving only shame that suffocated me. I couldn't take it anymore. I staggered and turned to leave the room. As I shut the door, a cry of utter despair came from behind me. Edward, please don't go. I still left without looking back. If I had stayed to comfort her, the breakup would have failed for sure. She would have seized the chance to keep clinging to me. A breakup has to be a clean cut. You can't leave any room for doubt. She still had a bunch of things in my apartment, so I had already rented her a place. I planned to move all her things there. I worked from that night until the next afternoon. I lost count of how many trips I made. I was so exhausted my back was killing me. I didn't plan to see Miriam again. I knew full well how cruel I had been, and I couldn't bear to see her cry again. So I called her best friend Rachel. I asked her to help, after Miriam was discharged, to give her the lease and keys to the new place. We agreed to meet at a cafe. Before I left, I made sure to clean myself up, to look sharp and put together, as if nothing had happened. But I waited a long time. Rachel never showed up. I stared blankly at the water the waiter had set down. "I'd like that mousse cake, please." A clear female voice rang out from the counter. "E instinctive really glanced over. When I spotted that small figure with the high ponytail, I paused. She looked just like Miriam when she was young. They were almost identical. Memories came flooding back. I was the one who found Miriam. I was 16 and she was 13. I was an orphan, and so was she as it happened. But her story compared to mine was far more tragic. My parents died from a gas water heater leak in the winter. Carbon monoxide poisoning. I was living at school at the time, so I narrowly escaped the same fate. When I returned home, they were already gone, but they had at least left me a small 2-bedroom apartment. My parents' employer took pity on me and gave me a small insurance settlement. A social worker helped cover my tuition. Money was tight, but I managed. Miriam's parents, on the other hand, were big names in town. They ran a large factory, but they had a string of terrible luck. Their business crumbled bit by bit, leaving behind a mountain of debt. Collectors were at their door and factory gate almost daily. They threw paint on the walls, shouting threats and intimidating them. In the end, her parents couldn't take the pressure anymore. They climbed to the roof of their factory and jumped to their deaths. The house and cars were quickly auctioned off. All the salvageable equipment in the factory was stripped clean by loan sharks. Miriam suddenly had nowhere to go. The day I found her, it was snowing just as heavily. Exactly like today. She was wearing nothing but a thin long-sleeve shirt and flimsy slippers on her feet. She stood shivering outside a convenience store, standing under the blinding glow of a security camera light. I was just starting high school then. I was walking home after my evening study session. I looked up and saw her hugging herself, crying and shivering. Her hair and face were dusted with snow, so I took her home and made her a bowl of instant noodles. From that day on, I had a little sister. It wasn't that I wanted one. Back then, I could barely take care of myself. How could I possibly have the energy for a kid? But every time I took her to her aunt's place, she'd run back within an hour, standing at my door, gazing up at me with those big, tear-filled eyes. That look made it impossible for me to turn her away. From then on, she just stayed in my life and never left. She became the most troublesome yet wonderful accident. To be honest, looking back now, the years with Miriam were the happiest years of my life. After my parents passed, I always felt like a kid forgotten in a corner. No one remembered me. No one cared. My dad's parents had died years earlier. On my mother's side, they acted like I didn't exist. I tried staying at my grandmother's place a few times, but every time, my aunt would deliberately bang things around in front of me, her face full of irritation. My grandmother would just sigh heavily. I was only 12 at the time, but I already understood that I wasn't welcome there. I never went back after that. Until Miriam came into my life, I finally felt like I had a home again. I was a high school freshman. She was in middle school. Every morning, I made her breakfast. I woke her up and rode my bike to take her to school. She didn't have evening classes, so she got home before me. She would pick up groceries on the way, cook dinner. She always saved me a portion, waiting for me to come home and eat. To save money, we often went to the market to pick up the bruised produce vendors were about to toss. Mr. Henderson at the butcher shop would sell us the leftover scraps at a discount. We scraped by like that for 3 years. That year, she got into my old high school, and I went to college. I chose a decent school nearby, so I could come home on weekends to help her with her homework. Of course, there was another, more secret reason. I was always too ashamed to admit it. By then, I'd already fallen for Miriam. I fell for this girl who saw me as her brother. I was ashamed of myself for it, but I couldn't help it, and I didn't want to ruin what we had. If you love a flower, sometimes it's enough just to watch it bloom quietly. You don't have to own it. Just watching from the side, watching it bloom slowly. That simple existence itself is already a kind of happiness. That's how I consoled myself back then. But at some point, Miriam's feelings toward me had quietly shifted. The first thing to change was how she addressed me. She stopped using the childhood nickname. She started calling me Big Brother. I told her that was too formal. It didn't feel like us. She'd pout and glare at me, looking annoyed. Eventually, she'd just call me Edward. But the way she said Edward felt completely different from everyone else. There was more sweetness, more intimacy. I tried to correct her at first, told her to stop. She wouldn't listen. In the end, I let it slide. As long as she was happy, it didn't matter what she called me. It was winter break. It was the first snow of the year. We had just finished buying groceries and were walking home. The amber streetlights cast a warm glow on her face. Snowflakes spun beneath the lamps, melting on her hair and shoulders. At that moment, she looked like an angel. The scene was so perfect it felt surreal. I don't know what came over me. The words just slipped out. She stopped dead in her tracks, staring at me blankly, her face full of disbelief. "What did you just say?" Her reddened face snapped me out of it. I suddenly realized what I'd said. I hurried my steps, almost running away. "Edward, stop. What did you say? I want to hear it again." Miriam called out and jogged after me. And what I had said was, "Miriam, I like you." Now this memory kept swirling in my head, making me a little dizzy. Even though we were over, the feelings built up over the years couldn't just be switched off. A crushing emptiness washed over me, as if the most important piece of my life had been ripped away. And thankfully, Rachel finally arrived. Her arrival snapped me out of my spiraling thoughts. I had just stood up to greet her. Instead, I was met with a hard slap across my face. The force was insane. It left left my head spinning. My ears were ringing. Edward, are you a monster? When Miriam needed you most, you broke up with her? Are you even human? Her eyes were red. Her jaw was clenched. Her whole face radiating fury. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I noticed people around us staring. I didn't want to cause a public scene, so I lowered my voice and motioned for her to sit. Rachel sat down reluctantly, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She stared daggers at me, as if she wanted to cut me open. I slid the lease agreement and the new keys across the table. She glanced at them, allowed a bitter laugh. What? So you're kicking her to the curb? Not even a roof over her head. I must have been blind. I used to think you treated her well. You're trash. Guilt washed over me immediately. I didn't even dare to defend myself. I said quietly, Rachel, I rented this place for her. The lease is for 3 years. I've already moved all her things there. She stared at me silently, looking me up and down, without a word. I pressed on. I'm leaving town soon, going out of state to start a business with a friend. She's still in the hospital. She might need a cornea transplant soon. When that happens, could you please stay with her? Rachel's piercing gaze fixed on my face. It made my skin crawl. I didn't even dare to look back at her. She said coldly, Miriam is my best friend. I don't need you to tell me to take care of her. Unlike you, I don't run when things get tough. You make me sick. I wanted to say more. I wanted to ask about Miriam's post-surgery care, but Rachel stood up abruptly. She snatched my glass of water and with a splash, poured it all over my head. When the glass was empty, she slammed it back onto the table. She shouted at me, Edward, don't play the victim with me. I'm not Miriam. If you're leaving, then get the hell out. Don't ever let her see you again. Otherwise, I'll hit you every time I see you. The only reason I came today is to handle this for her. Just looking at you makes me nauseous. You're a coward. Go crawl back into your shell and stay there. I'll take care of her. We don't need you. Then she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I stared numbly at the door she had walked through. Everyone in the cafe was staring at me. Those judgmental looks seemed to see straight through to my rotten core. But none of that mattered. I was leaving soon anyway. What they thought of me didn't matter. I would start over somewhere else. I walked out of the cafe. The cold air hit me. I couldn't help but shiver. It had started snowing again. We had so much snow that year, storm after storm, as if the whole city was being buried in white. Before I finally left, I spent a few days retracing all the places Miriam and I used to go. As a final farewell to this dead relationship. I had always been someone who needed closure, but every time I thought of her, my chest would still ache. But it was okay. Time would heal everything. Someday, we'd both get used to living without each other. Finally, the day I left arrived. I felt a mix of anticipation and a sadness I couldn't name. In the end, I clenched my jaw and let go. To the girl I had left behind, I silently waved goodbye. Goodbye, Miriam. I'm gone. You'll have to learn to live on your own now. 7 years later, in the brightly lit television studio, Miriam sat on the guest panel. She appeared with the full cast of her new fantasy series. To promote it, during the lightning round QA, the host suddenly turned to her. Miriam, have you ever experienced a love as unforgettable as the one in your drama? Miriam paused for a beat. Then she gave a firm smile. In terms of love, no. But I do have a hatred so deep it feels embedded in my bones. That hatred makes me want to kill him myself. The veteran host immediately caught the scent of gossip. He latched onto those words. He clearly wasn't going to let this chance to capitalize on her past go. He wanted the ratings. He pressed such deep hatred. Does that mean he was truly awful? Did he hurt you that badly that you still can't let it go? Or maybe, could it be because you loved him so deeply that you hate him this much? Miriam suddenly fell quiet. The atmosphere turned awkward. A young male co-star next to her jumped in to save the moment. Miriam probably doesn't have any grand love stories, but I do. Let me tell you all. Then he launched into a rambling story. From middle school through college, spilling his entire dating history. The host had to keep signaling him to finally get him to shut up. But from the moment the host asked that question, Miriam seemed completely distracted. She looked dazed, so much so that in the games that followed, she was checked out almost the whole time. Her team kept losing points and failing miserably. Everyone could tell something was wrong. As the show ended, the host began his usual wrap-up, wishing the show great success, reminding viewers to tune in. And then Miriam suddenly raised her microphone. She looked at the host. Her face was dead serious. She simply said yes. At that moment, the studio fell silent for a second, but no one pressed further. But that night, that clip shot straight to the top of every social media trending list. Hashtag Miriam love and hate. Hashtag Miriam admits unforgettable ex. Hashtag Miriam says yes. It was a late autumn night. The air was damp with dew. Crickets chirped in the shadows. Miriam curled up on the sofa on her balcony. A thin shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She sipped red wine slowly. She was frighteningly thin, as if at any moment the darkness beside her might swallow her whole. She set down her glass. She stared at her phone screen. On the screen was a draft. It read, Edward, if you come back right now, get on your knees and beg for my forgiveness, and maybe slap yourself a few times. Maybe I'll consider forgiving you. It was a number she could dial in her sleep, but for 7 years, she had never once called it. After downing half a bottle of red wine. She slowly closed her eyes, took a deep breath, as if making some monumental decision. With trembling fingers, she finally hit send. The message had barely sent. She started unconsciously picking at her knuckles again, a habit she'd had since she was a kid. Whenever Edward used to see it, he would take her hand. The warmth of his palm always calmed her down. She picked up her phone, then set it down, then picked it up again, back and forth. The minutes crawled by. Her heart grew more and more restless. He didn't reply. Absolutely nothing. Fury ignited inside her. She just called the number outright. After a few rings, a sleepy woman's voice answered. "Hello, who's this?" Miriam froze. Was this his wife? Or his girlfriend? Of course. That heartless man had moved on long ago. She was the only one still stuck in the past, going crazy. She gritted her teeth, her voice cutting like a knife. "I'm looking for Edward Miller." There was a 2-second pause. "Ma'am, I think you have the wrong number. I don't know any Edward Miller." Then she hung up. Miriam stared at call ended. She felt like she was crumbling. How could he just break it off like that and then disappear without a trace? Walk away without even a glance back. She hit redial again. The woman answered. Her tone was annoyed. "Do you know what time it is?" "I already told you. I don't know any Edward Miller." Miriam opened her mouth. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. The woman sighed. Her voice softened a little. "Look, the person you're looking for might have had this number before. In the first few years I had it, I did get a few calls looking for him. For some reason, hearing that, Miriam felt a slight relief. At least she knew this woman wasn't someone in his life. Guilt pricked at her. "I'm sorry for disturbing you. Could I just ask one more question? How long have you had this number?" The woman paused. "About 6 years. Then she hung up. 6 years. Not long after they broke up. He had changed it." Miriam let out a cold, bitter laugh. Once a man falls out of love, they really are the cruelest creatures on earth. And she had stubbornly kept that number for 7 full years. Just in case one day he wanted to reach her, he could still trace her through it. She tipped her head back and downed the last of the wine. Half drunk and dizzy, she curled into the corner of the sofa and muttered to herself, "Edward, how could you be this cruel? How could you vanish like that? I'm a huge star now. I have more money than I could ever spend. See, I'm not that girl anymore who dragged you down. So why won't you come back? Even just as friends. Even if I have to see you with someone else. Just let me see your face one more time. Just one look. Is that too much?" She cried as she spoke. But all that answered her was the cold wind howling on the balcony, wailing through the night. After Miriam became famous, the relatives who had avoided her like the plague all came crawling back. Each had their own story, justifying their coldness, saying money had been tight and they couldn't afford to raise a teenager, especially with all her parents' debts. Loan sharks were always causing trouble. There was that whole children pay their parents' debts thing. She just nodded calmly. She didn't bother to argue. She had her assistant throw a few $1,000s at them just to get rid of them. She treated it as charity. They were still family, after all, but at the same time, they could also become a risk for media leaks. As a public figure, she couldn't let them cause her bad press. Besides, just as they had said, everyone had their own struggles. She couldn't blame them for not taking her in, except for one person, her aunt. The moment her aunt heard that other relatives were getting money, she started showing up every couple of days. Miriam had her assistant block her every time. She would never forget when she was 13. Right after her parents died, her aunt, her mother's only sister, had looked at her with such disgust. Back when her family was still doing well, they had bailed her aunt out constantly. Her parents had bought her house and car. But after everything fell apart, her aunt's family treated her like she was a plague. Since there were no other close relatives to take her, social workers had to do a lot of convincing. Only then did her aunt reluctantly take her in. She was 13, just starting puberty. One day, she realized some of her underwear was missing. Until one day, she walked in and caught her uncle fondling her underwear. She was both humiliated and furious. But she had no one to tell. She swallowed it all. Her uncle grew bolder. Whenever her aunt was out, he would take the chance to touch her. Eventually, she told her aunt through tears. But her aunt didn't confront him. Instead, she called her a shameless little slut, accusing her of seducing him. She was desperate and furious. She tried to defend herself, but her aunt slapped her twice, and then she was kicked out. That day, the snow fell thick and fast. She wore only a thin, long-sleeve shirt, and on her feet were the cheap cartoon slippers her parents had bought her. She wandered aimlessly through the streets. Snowflakes covered her. Soon she was blanketed in white. A group of young men whistled and approached her. Terrified, she ran. She fled blindly to a convenience store. There was a security camera and people around. The guys looked around and slunk off. She stood frozen at the door, letting the snow pile up at her feet. From a moment, the street lights flickered on until the shopkeeper finally shut the steel door for the night. Cold and hunger pushed her to the breaking point. She was on the verge of passing out. Just as she was about to collapse, he appeared, Edward. He braked his bicycle, one foot on the ground. He frowned, concerned. "Hey kid, what are you doing here alone? Where are your parents?" Miriam looked up at the boy. His blue and white school jacket was dusted with snow. Snowflakes rested on his messy hair and dotted the tip of his nose, melting in the warmth of his breath. His eyes were gentle, bright as stars. Snowflakes snowflakes clung to his lashes. He looked like an angel from a painting. She didn't answer. She just whispered, barely audible, "I'm so hungry." So this boy let her climb onto the back of his bike, took her home, and made her a bowl of instant noodles. It was the best meal she had ever had. The next morning, the alcohol had worn off a little. Miriam put her public mask back on, becoming that glamorous, confident superstar again. But that hollow in her heart still ached. Ever since that host had inadvertently reopened her old wound, one question kept circling her mind. Where was he? In what corner of the world? She had asked Rachel, but Rachel just called her delusional for still pining over a heartless bastard. She even went back to their old neighborhood. But when neighbors saw her, they only talked about how famous she was. They begged for meals and selfies to post on Facebook. She even tracked down old Mr. Henderson. He still remembered Edward, said he was an honest, hardworking kid. But even he had no idea where Edward was. Not a single clue. A strange panic suddenly rose inside her. She couldn't sit still. She canceled all her work commitments and began a systematic search with her assistant, asking everywhere for a man named Edward Miller. Everywhere she went, she got the same answer. No one knew where he was. No one had seen him, as if he no longer existed. That thought terrified Miriam. Her chest tightened. She could barely breathe. No, it can't be. If he were sick or in an accident, someone would have known. She told herself that again and again. Then she started going through the old boxes she had kept all these years. Inside were all the things Edward had moved into that apartment. She remembered the first time Rachel took her to see it. She had cursed Edward the whole way. Bastard, scumbag, hope he rots, things like that. One after another. At that time, her vision had started to recover a bit. When she stood in that little apartment, she couldn't hold back her tears. It was a south-facing studio. Spotless. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The whole place was warm and bright. The decor was all in her favorite colors. Even the comforter had her favorite cartoon prints. She rummaged through an old box and found the old lease. She turned to the last page. There was his signature. She stared at that smooth, clear handwriting for a long time. Her eyes suddenly stung. A tear dropped right onto the page. She quickly wiped it off with her sleeve. She traced his name with her fingertip. On the other side was the landlord's signature and number. She called it right away. She met with the landlord, well, the real estate agent, at a bookshop cafe. The agent was a middle-aged woman. She was thrilled to see Miriam. The first 10 minutes were all selfies from every angle. She only settled down after posting on Facebook. Miriam could only smile and play along. Once the woman calmed down, she handed over the old lease. "I wanted to ask, do you remember a tenant named Edward Miller?" The agent nodded at the name. "Edward, I've known that boy since he was little. Haven't seen him in years, though." Miriam's heart sank. "When he rented this place, was he all right? Did you hear if he was sick or anything?" The woman tilted her head, then shook her head. "Not that I know of, but it was right after your accident. He had me sell his own house." Miriam's head shot up. The agent went on, "You know that place in an older part of town, but the school district was great. It fed into a top elementary school. It should have gone for more, but he only listed it for $75,000. Said it was urgent and he needed cash fast. I told him to slow down. If he waited, he'd get more. He wouldn't budge." Miriam suddenly remembered that debit card, $75,000. That was the money from selling his house. He'd sold his house and given it all to her. Where had he lived after that? And how did he get by? How had he survived that period? Miriam murmured to herself. The agent didn't hear her. She just kept talking. "After he sold the house, he came back to rent from me. This one right here. The one on the lease you have. I remember showing him at least a dozen places. He was so picky. This one had bad lighting. That one had bad security. He made me want to give up. If I hadn't known him since he was a kid, I'd have told him to find someone else." The woman chuckled. She took a sip of her coffee. Finally, he settled on this one. He was so happy. Insisted on a 3-year lease and insisted on paying everything up front. I told him he could do 6 months and renew later. He didn't listen. He was dead set on paying it all. What a sweet, foolish kid. The woman shook her head, remembering. She couldn't help but smile and shake her head. Miriam's hands were trembling uncontrollably. She fumbled in her bag, pulled out a wad of cash, and dropped it on the table. She shot up from her chair and almost fled the cafe, leaving the agent frozen in shock, speechless. After that, Miriam posted on all her social media the same message, looking for Edward Miller, age 30, graduated from Springfield High School. If you have any leads, please contact me. Generous reward. This post caused a massive fight with her agency. Her manager said she was too impulsive. If her rivals got hold of this, they could use it to destroy her. Endorsement penalties alone could cost millions. But Miriam didn't care. Her reckless determination made her manager sigh in relent. She had managed Miriam for years. She knew how professional she was. Never late, never unprepared. All these years in the spotlight, she had never had a single scandal, nor any bad press. Compared to the other troublemakers in the agency, Miriam was a dream client. Luckily, she just said she was looking for someone. She didn't specify their relationship. With her fame and the buzz from her hit show, the post went viral instantly. Soon, a photo of a man named Edward Miller began circulating across platforms. Clues started coming in. Someone claimed to be his college classmate, saying they suspected Edward had stomach cancer. During their thesis defense, they had seen him secretly taking pills. Edward just said his stomach was upset. The classmate said his own father had died of stomach cancer, and he recognized the packaging immediately. Another claimed to be a friend, saying Edward had once mentioned donating his body to medical research and had looked up details online. Another nurse commented, saying she had interned at the hospital. Around the time of Miriam's accident, she often saw Edward outside Miriam's room. She saw him doubled over in pain, clutching his stomach. All the clues pointed to the same truth. He had been very sick. She suddenly remembered how fast he had lost weight. He looked like he'd been hollowed out. He always complained of stomach pain and always took pills behind her back. She had worried then, too, but he just smiled and brushed it off, saying it was stress from school and work. He was too busy and his stomach had given out. The signs had been there all along. 2 weeks later, Miriam finally pieced everything together. The man named Edward Miller was already dead. 7 years ago, he had left this world. A medical student saw the picture online and said he looked exactly like a cadaver they had used in anatomy class. He was identical. He said the whole class had been sad because the donor had been so young. And good looking too. Miriam went straight to that medical school. She told them she was Edward's sister. The academic dean bowed deeply and took her to Springfield Memorial Cemetery. He explained as they walked. After Mr. Miller fulfilled his 3-year teaching role, his remains were cremated and laid to rest here. Edward wasn't alone. Beside him were many others who had given their bodies to science. His headstone had no photo, only a line etched by the school. As in life, he gave, in death, he gives still. The line was already translated above. The cemetery was well kept. The grass was neatly trimmed. Miriam sat down on the grass beside his stone. The dean saw she needed privacy and quietly withdrew. She stared at the stone. Her eyes were dry. So many tears had probably already been spent over the past 7 years. She gently traced the cold stone. Edward, did you have this planned all along? To use this method to push me forward? Don't worry. I have a brand new life now. I'm a huge star, surrounded by a bunch of handsome actors. I don't miss you at all. I'll live well. Take good care of myself. That's what you wanted, isn't it? I've really been loving a song lately. It's called A Little Red Flower for You. I want to play it for you. She pulled out her phone. She played the song that, in her darkest, most hopeless moments, had given her strength again and again. A little red flower for you. She looked at the stone and whispered, "This little red flower is for you. Let it rest on the new branch that grew yesterday. Pin a little red flower there. That's a reward for finding the courage to come and talk to me. He deserves this little red flower." Screen goddess Miriam, over a 30-year career, she stayed clean without a single scandal. She never married. And that old interview clip where she said yes every few years would be dug up and replayed by the media. Everyone wondered if she had spent her whole life unable to let go of someone from her past. That winter, Miriam became very ill. She completely lost the will to go on. She whispered to herself, "Edward, I can't hold on anymore. I'm so tired. I want to give up. Please don't be mad at me, okay?" She made her final arrangements early. She told her assistant to make sure she was buried at Springfield Memorial Cemetery. She couldn't share his grave, but at least she could be near him. 2 days later, she slipped into a deep coma. In that daze between sleep and waking, a smile crossed her face as sweet as a girl's. She murmured, "Edward." Maybe in her dream, they were finally together again. Clear snowflakes like scattered pear blossoms drifted down. It was the first snow of the new year. "Edward, I was a bastard back then. My girlfriend was in the hospital after a car crash. She was about to lose her sight, and at that very moment, I chose to leave her. But I had to. That feeling was like someone tearing my heart out. My whole world collapsed. Did I have any other choice? If I hadn't left then, soon enough, I would have been forced to leave anyway. Leaving later would only hurt her more and waste more of her life. What would be the point? My stomach cancer was already stage 4. I begged the doctors to save me. They just sighed and shook their heads. To be honest, if it weren't for Miriam, I wouldn't have had much reason to live anyway. With her in my life, even the ants on the sidewalk seemed precious. I didn't want to die. When I was first diagnosed, I fought it with everything I had. I tried every treatment, but after 6 months, I was ultimately given a death sentence. Then last week, Miriam got into that accident, and that damn driver fled. Almost all my savings had gone to my own treatment, so I had to list my parents' old house. I asked for a flat price. The place was old, but the location was great. It could have sold for much more, but I stubbornly listed it for only $75,000 and cash only. Miriam would almost certainly need a cornea transplant transplant. But for someone like her with no connections and no money, the wait for a donor cornea would take years. I took my medical records to her lead doctor. I completed all the forms and registered as her designated donor, reserving my corneas just for her. After all, my life was already over. A few more days one way or another didn't matter. For her, I would give my life without hesitation. Just knowing my eyes could let her see again filled me with an indescribable joy. I donated the rest of my body to the medical school as a cadaver. That way, I wouldn't have to worry about becoming an unclaimed body. It sounded like a pretty thorough plan. The only thing I couldn't let go of was her, my Miriam. How could I bear to leave her alone in this world? We had always been everything to each other. I admitted myself to the hospital, mainly because I was terrified of dying alone somewhere. By the time someone found me, my corneas would be useless. Before I finished checking in, I went to see Miriam's doctor one last time. He told me Miriam had been refusing the transplant. She was afraid of the cost. She just wanted to go home. But last night, she finally said yes. I made him promise to keep my identity a secret. He nodded solemnly, his gaze heavy. We will. We have strict donor confidentiality rules. I felt a little better. I let myself relax a little. Then I went up to her floor. I wore a mask and cap, like a thief sneaking in at night. It was completely unnecessary. With her vision now, even if I stood right in front of her, she wouldn't recognize me. I stopped outside her door. I looked through the small glass pane. She looked just as she had the day I left, standing alone by the window, staring out at nothing. She looked so heartbreakingly lonely. My hand accidentally brushed the door. A faint sound. She spun around. She called out with hope in her voice. Edward, is that you? Tears spilled out of me. I pressed myself against the wall to stay out of her line of sight. All she heard was the usual hospital noise in the corridor. After a long moment, she finally realized no one was there. She slowly sank to the floor. She wrapped her arms around her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. In my mind, I said it 1,000 times. Only then did I truly understand that hurting her was harder than loving her. By far. Miriam, I truly hope you can cry this all out until there's nothing left. And then forget me quickly. After all, a man who abandoned you when you needed him most is nothing but a bastard. He doesn't deserve another second of your thoughts. Just go live your new life, and I will slowly fade to dust in your memory. The pain got worse and worse, so bad my thoughts started to scatter. The doctor prescribed painkillers, but I secretly gave them to the patient next to me. He was suffering too. I used to want to live. I just wanted more time with Miriam. But now, I just wished it would end soon, so she could get my eyes earlier. Maybe because I had completely lost the will to live. My body deteriorated day by day. Eventually, I could only lie in bed, listening to my own ragged breathing. Then one day, for some reason, I suddenly felt much lighter. The pain had faded. I even felt a little hungry. I told the nurse I wanted some chicken noodle soup. He looked at me with so much pity. He went to the cafeteria and came back with a bowl of chicken soup and some scrambled eggs. He stood there, watching me eat every last bite. When I finished, he asked if I wanted anything else. I shook my head, said I was tired. I wanted to rest. He helped lower my bed and drew the curtains. Rest easy. I'll be right outside. Ring if you need anything. I said okay. A little later, I drifted off. In my dream, I felt weightless, like the soup and eggs had given me so much energy. But something felt wrong. No, Miriam is still waiting for her sight. The pain faded slowly. My mind was clearer than it had been in months. I saw myself at 20 and Miriam at 17. Snowflakes swirled in the air, landing softly on us. Her cheeks were red from a cold. She grabbed me and stood in front of me. Edward, what did you say? Say it again. I pretended to be casual. I didn't say anything. You misheard. No, I heard you perfectly. What, Edward? Yeah, I like you too. I froze. The grocery bag slipped from my hand. Vegetables scattered across the snow. A cold wind blew, tousling her hair. She shivered. I pulled her into my arms, holding her close. This is good. Let it be. End it right here. Let this moment be the final scene of our story. Suddenly, a shrill alarm blared in my ears, like a machine going off. All the sounds around me blurred, loud and chaotic, but luckily, it only lasted a moment. Then, all the sounds faded away. The images in my mind slowly faded, until nothing remained, only a void of blank emptiness.